This is an ABC News special report. The House impeachment hearings. Now reporting, George Stephanopoulos.
Welcome back to our coverage of the impeachment of President Trump. The hearing room at 1100 House Longworth Building still empty right now as members coming back from the floor from a vote. But as they return for the second half of this hearing with Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch, we have breaking news also out of Washington, D.C. Roger Stone, one of the president's longest-serving political advisors, longtime friend of the president, has now been found guilty on 7 counts of lying to Congress and tampering with a witness. This is a spinoff of Robert Mueller's investigation. He's now facing up to 20 years in prison as you see him heading into the courtroom with his wife earlier this morning. I want to go straight to our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, with the latest on that verdict.
George, you're correct. This is 7 federal felonies that Roger Stone has been convicted of, all dealing with the fact that he lied to Congress about his efforts to get the information that WikiLeaks was going to provide concerning dirt about Hillary Clinton during the 2016 election. And why did he do it? Prosecutors in the case this week in their closing arguments pointed out to the fact that he did it to protect the president, or then candidate Donald Trump. Let me give you a statement from the closing arguments. Quote, Stone knew that if his information came out, it would likely look really bad for his longtime associate, Donald Trump. So he lied to the committee. So again, George, this is a confidant of the president, a man who described himself as a so-called dirty trickster, one who loved Richard Nixon, who's now been convicted of 7 federal felonies and now facing prison time. George.
Testimony during the trial included evidence of phone calls between Roger Stone and the president during the campaign where the president was being informed about what WikiLeaks may or may not have been doing. That testimony came from the president's former deputy campaign manager, Rick Gates. I want to go to John Carl for more on this, our chief White House correspondent. And John, as I said right here at the start, Roger Stone has been long associated with President Trump, learned at the feet of Roy Cohn.
Roy Cohn, in fact, introduced Donald Trump to Roger Stone back in 1979. George, in some ways, you can look at Roger Stone as the founding father of the Trump presidential campaign, although he played a minor role in the 2016 campaign and, in fact, was fired as an advisor early on in 2015. Roger Stone was Donald Trump's first political advisor. He was somebody who has been pushing Donald Trump to run for president really on a 4-year basis, going all the way back, you could argue, to the late 1980s. And when Donald Trump briefly formed an exploratory committee in 1999 to run as the Reform Party candidate, it was Roger Stone that was pushing all of that. So this is somebody about as close to the president's political ambitions as you can find. He also, by the way, was a longtime partner of Paul Manafort. They had a lobbying firm here in Washington, Manafort, Stone, and Kelly, and they were longtime partners. He was also, when Donald Trump hired his first paid political advisor for the 2016 cycle, he hired a guy by the name of Sam Nunberg, who worked for Roger Stone. This is somebody who really was the person that put the political bug in Donald Trump.
And John, he was formally fired from the campaign, I think, in late 2015, but he maintained contact with President Trump.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. He talked with President Trump, advised the campaign supporters throughout that campaign. It was a hot and cold relationship. At times, Trump would get irritated that what he saw as Roger Stone taking credit for his political success. But make no mistake, Donald Trump saw Roger Stone as somebody he would talk to and be advised on in politics going way back to the 1980s and throughout the 2016 campaign as well.
Okay, John, thanks. Our reporter, Ali Dukakis, was inside the courtroom as the verdict was read. Ali, I think we have you on the phone right now. Just give us a sense of the scene.
Hey, George. So right now, reporters are frantically waiting outside for Roger to leave. He looked extremely upset when he was found guilty on all 7 counts. He faces a statutory maximum of up to 50 years in jail. His wife was sitting in front of me, hugged a family friend, and said, he'll be okay. I'm not sure that feeling is reverberating among the rest of their family right now. They were clearly extremely upset. They had hoped that at least on 1 or 2 counts he would not be found guilty. But you could really hear a pin drop. It was a sudden verdict. They didn't let us know that the jury had a verdict. They just said there was a note. So this went down very quickly and swiftly.
And yeah, the jury deliberated. They began deliberating only yesterday morning, and they reached a pretty quick verdict.
That's right. And they were supposed to continue this case. The trial was originally scheduled to go through the week of Thanksgiving. So the prosecution clearly felt that they had made their case. That's why they wrapped early. Just really a day and a half in deliberation for the jury.
Thank you, Allie. This verdict closes another chapter in the investigation of Robert Mueller. I want to put up on the screen right now the number of Trump associates, close Trump associates, who reached either guilty pleas or were convicted. As John Carl mentioned, the president's former campaign chair, Paul Manafort, guilty. The president's former national security advisor pleaded guilty, Michael Flynn. He's still awaiting sentencing. Rick Gates, the president's former deputy campaign manager, also pleaded guilty. He was a strong cooperating witness in this case right here. Foreign policy aide George Papadopoulos. Of course, the president's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, who's serving a prison term in upstate New York right now for his role in the hush money payments, campaign finance violations of President Trump. And now the president's longtime political associate, Roger Stone, found guilty as well. Dan Abrams, Robert Mueller was criticized for his testimony before the Congress, but quite a lineup there on top of course, the indictments of those Russian nationals for their interference in our campaign.
Well, and I would argue that's the single most important of the indictments is of the Russians, because that was for hacking. And I really would encourage anyone who's interested in this topic to go and read those indictments, because the two sets of indictments of the Russians really do lay out the roadmap of exactly how the Russians did what they did. But today, the news of Roger Stone will and does come back to Donald Trump to some degree. The prosecution's theory in this case was that Stone was lying to protect Donald Trump. And he didn't present much of a defense in the case. I mean, it was a pretty easy case for prosecutors to prove that he was lying, that he was trying to obstruct, that he was trying to interfere with a witness testifying. And it seems that they had just kind of hoped that maybe they'd get one juror and they could hang the jury. And now you have to believe that based on the lack of defense he presented, based on the type of defense he presented, based on the fact that he didn't enter into any kind of plea deal, et cetera, that he's hoping for a pardon from the president.
And that gets to the point. Talk about worlds colliding, Kate Shaw, as we talk about Paul Manafort. One of the things that Ambassador Yovanovitch was accused of, or is it the president was concerned with, was that the Ukrainians were trying to interfere in his election, including the release of the ledger of Paul Manafort that got him fired because of those illegal payments. Of course, he's now in jail, and there had been some talk that part of what was motivating the president was to prove that Paul Manafort had been set up, maybe to set up a pardon for him as well.
Right. So there have been, the possibility of pardons have been on the table for a number of the president's associates. We haven't seen any yet, right? So I think that sort of pardon watch will be on with respect to Roger Stone in particular. But you do see a lot of connections between the facts that underlie this indictment and now conviction and the sort of sequence of events that's before Congress right now at a high level of generality, which is, this is about foreign interference in elections, right? So we still have sort of the fallout of the Mueller investigation into the 2016 election interference. And at the same time, the conduct being alleged in the impeachment proceedings is largely about trying to get assistance to aid in the president's re-election efforts. So they're conceptually linked. And, the one other thing I would say is I feel like this conviction has to be a reminder that lying to Congress is an indictable offense. You can be convicted for it. So to the extent that there are people who haven't yet testified in these impeachment proceedings, this has to serve as kind of a stark reminder that there is real criminal exposure if you lie to Congress.
Gordon Sondland might be thinking about that as well. But of course, the pardon power, another area where the president's power is very, very broad.
Very, very broad. He can wield it in whatever way he likes, and the only real check on it is the sort of political process. I mean, we've seen presidents in the past issue pardons that have garnered a lot of criticism from the public, maybe have affected re-election prospects. Gerald Ford comes to mind. But it is the president's power to deploy at his discretion, and Roger Stone is surely hoping that that discretion will be used here in his case.
Terry Moran, I want to bring you in on this and talk about Dan Abrams talked about the indictments, of course, of the Russian nationals, the importance of that. Of course, the import of one of the theories that the president was pushing on the phone call with President Zelensky, with Rudy Giuliani, this CrowdStrike theory is designed to show that it was Ukraine, not Russia, who was behind the election interference.
And this is another example, George, of the president not believing his own government, the government of the United States. He has scorned the intelligence community's findings that it was Russia that attacked the United States, attacked our democracy and election. And he doesn't credit what the Mueller investigation clearly lays out in these indictments, that it was Russia through specific officers of the military intelligence at specific places, Mueller found, that launched the attack on the United States. The president is after this conspiracy theory that, no, it was really Ukraine that attacked the United States. And that is one of the ties to this impeachment hearing. The other is exactly what Kate Shaw just said, which is lying to Congress is a crime. This is a vindication, this verdict, of the power of Congress, the power of the House Intelligence Committee to investigate. And Roger Stone took this kind of scornful attitude about it all, almost a kind of Trumpian attitude. Who cares about Congress? No one cares about them. Well, somebody does care, jurors, who are told that it is a crime to lie to Congress, and they will find you guilty and send you to prison. And there are people, like Gordon Sondland maybe, who want to pay attention to this verdict today.
John Carl, the president's still paying attention to the news right now. He's already tweeted showing where his sympathies lie.
Absolutely. And I will have a chance to ask him directly about this, George. The president's got an event at 2 o'clock at the White House. We will be in that forum, and I will ask him. But here you see what he has just said about Roger Stone via Twitter. So they now convict Roger Stone of lying and want to jail him for many years to come. Well, what about? And then he goes through the list of, Crooked Hillary, Comey, Strzok Page, the list of people that he thinks have been out to get him over the years, even suggesting, by the way, in there that Mueller himself should somehow be found guilty for something.
And Pierre, one of the things you're seeing there in that list the president has following Roger Stone is one of the things that he's been saying for months, now going into years, that the initial investigation, FBI investigation into his campaign was corrupt from the start. No evidence of that has come to light so far, but we are awaiting an Inspector General's report looking into the origins of the Russia investigation.
George, we are. The Inspector General report, we think, will be coming out perhaps as early December. He's looked at, again, as you said, the origins of just how the Russia investigation first started. Were those surveillance warrants duly lawful, which were put forth by the Justice Department? Also, we have a separate investigation beyond the Inspector General investigation being conducted by the Attorney General and a federal prosecutor on his team that is looking at whether any laws were broken in connection with how the origins of the investigation started as well, George. And one of the things I think is important to remember about this Stone conviction is that the WikiLeaks whole scandal involved the fact that the U.S. government, the intelligence community, determined that WikiLeaks got their information, the dirt and the emails that they were publishing concerning Hillary Clinton, from the Russians. That is the contention of the U.S. intelligence community that they put forth, George.
Okay, Pierre, thanks.